Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first Conversations Worth Having for this year's World Suicide Prevention Day campaign. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Katie. I am the Director of Communication here at To Write Love on Her Arms, and I'm very excited to be able to spend another day with all of you. So welcome. Feel free to interact with us in the comments. We can see all of those coming in. Let us know where you're watching from. Let us know why you're here. Tell us what you want another day with. And then I just wanted to make a little bit of a content note because this is a suicide prevention campaign and because our topic is understanding suicide, we will be talking about suicide in this conversation. And we know that that can get heavy, especially depending on your own personal experience. So we want you to know that it's okay for you to do whatever you need to do to care for your mental well-being right now. So if things do get too heavy and you need to step away, that's totally fine. If it's not something you can watch right now, this will be recorded. Basically, Facebook will save it on our page. You'll be able to come back and watch it later at a time that's better for you, or maybe when you're able to do that with another trusted human who can help you potentially process any parts of the conversation that might be difficult. So I just want to reiterate that it's okay to take care of yourself in these moments. So without further ado, I will not be hosting this conversation today. We are giving that responsibility to our fantastic friend, Stephan, who is our board president and a fantastic counselor, from what I've heard anyway. And then our guests as well. So let me take this banner off of here so we can see all of your names. And then Stephan, I will let you take it away and I will disappear to be behind the scenes where I like to be.
Thank you so much, Katie. That was great. So for the sake of time, let's just jump right in with introductions. I'll start. I'm Stephan Monteserín. I work with Solace Counseling in Orlando, Florida. This is my entering 9th year of counseling. Boy, saying that feels so weird, but I work with different populations, diverse populations. I love what I do. This is a topic that's very close to my heart, not only as a counselor, but someone who has struggled with mental health issues and suicidality in the past. And so I'm excited to be here. You want to start with Jessica?
Yes, hi everyone. I'm Jessica Spenceley and I'm based in the UK in England, and I run a company called Nurtured Belonging, where I provide therapeutic services to families who have been affected by trauma, in particular adoptive families. Alongside that work, I'm also a senior lecturer at the Institute for Arts in Therapy and Education, and I also contribute to the provision of adoption support services at the Intercountry Adoption Center.
Cool, thank you. Parker?
I am Parker Silver. I am an independent artist, also known as Hi Ho Silver Works, and I make a lot of art and TikToks about mental health and just going through your own struggles.
Cool, thank you. And Kelly?
Hi, y'all. My name is Kelly Davis. I'm the Associate Vice President of Peer and Youth Advocacy at Mental Health America. It takes me like 2 minutes to say my full name. I'm based in Philly. And my work is, I'm a suicide attempt survivor, a person with lived experience. And my work is really focused on how we can make lived experience perspective central to everything we do, whether that's policy, whether that's programs, organizations, research, every part of what it means to talk about mental health and suicide.
Cool, thank you, Kelly. So I kind of want to begin around the topic of barriers that exist to mental health and what some of those are. Kelly, you kind of mentioned the lived experience of lacking access. What was that like?
Yeah, I mean, I think, so my lived experience is what I use to demonstrate really broad issues with mental health services. So I actually had access to a lot of mental health services. And it was my experience that so much of the way that traditional mental health is set up is about carving out mental health. And I think suicide, bringing up suicide in particular, is really scary for people, and putting that kind of in this other part of your life where you can't talk about it outside. And that's if you're the luckiest people, right? For everybody else, for whatever reason, right? If you can't afford mental health services, there's no providers in your area, there's nobody who's responsive to you, right? LGBTQ plus folks all over the country. My story of not being adequately supported by mental health services in a comprehensive way is one of the best, right? One of the best stories, because I at least had access to services. So it's not that mental health resources weren't helpful. I think mental health professionals have helped me tremendously. I've been on medication, but I think a lot of the most profound help that I got was from other people with lived experience who were willing to talk about what worked for them, right? It wasn't just like to TikTok, right? And to art. It wasn't just, how do I rethink and reframe my suicidal thoughts? It was like, send me some memes because we want to die today. That kind of thing, right? So I think bringing in kind of a lived experience perspective, in addition to having access and creating access to all of these other helpful things was most important for me and a lot of the other folks I know who do activism in mental health.
Cool, thank you. Parker, she was sharing just about TikTok and art and memes, and can you speak to some of the barriers you've experienced or access that you've experienced and how you use art as a forum?
Yes, so I think one of the biggest barriers for especially people of color is the way that mental health isn't talked about, especially when we bring in the intersections of faith and the way communities are structured. So when you think about maybe your parents never went to therapy, but they did go to church every week. And as we move on in our own personal lives, how we have to kind of reframe the language and kind of break those generational cycles to bring up these conversations to be like, actually, I need an actual professional, or I need to learn more about myself so I can talk to my family. And one of the things I would say a lot about being on TikTok and being making memes is the accessibility and kind of quickness. You can share symptoms that people can recognize within themselves, identities that people can see within themselves, and just kind of make it more friendly. And so that way, because sometimes it is a shock for people to be like, oh, I need help. And so when you're just like, LOL, I'm in a parking lot drinking my 5th boba of the day. So it's like, and you're like, we both need therapy, don't we? So I think being able to see these communities and gain these languages, the language you need to break down these barriers and to kind of recognize like, oh, this is probably how people did it before they understood what was happening and had the ability. And this is how I can start to get on my own path to heal myself.
Yeah, so I see you kind of addressing some of the maybe cultural or identity barriers that would prevent certain kinds of access, lack of knowledge, you don't know what you don't know. And so if you don't even know which direction to go, you're going to lack access. And I hear you kind of saying, I'm creating opportunities for people to connect in these kind of quick ways that maybe translate or kind of code switch into providing access.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Jessica, what do you find that are some of the barriers to access in your community?
Well, picking up on what Kelly mentioned, I think that really shedding light on this topic is so important because when we think about adoption and suicide in particular, adoptees are 4 times more likely to attempt suicide than non-adoptees. And for me, that's a very sobering statistic. And that's one that not many people in the adoption community are really aware of. And so I think that, us being here today, being in community, is really important in shedding light on that. And once we have that raised awareness, I think that, it makes us more open, really, to talking about this topic, to understanding what are some of the real underlying factors, especially within adoption, that lead to those feelings of hopelessness and lead to suicidal ideation and suicide attempts. Where I live in England, we do have quite a lot of adoption professionals. And we also have access to a fund, which is fantastic for adoptive families to be able to get funding for services, which is amazing. But of course, one of the biggest barriers too is, that's dependent upon people actually being able to get access to those services in the first place where they live, who's actually qualified, and do they really understand what the nuances are within the adoption community with mental health, and in particular, really keeping this whole idea of suicidality in mind.
Yeah. So where do you all think that we should be focusing our attention as people who are aware, as people who do have access now, to eliminate some of these barriers? I'll let anyone jump in.
I think for me, a lot that I work on and focus on is making sure my language is accessible, because there is you get all these tools and you learn and you're in this setting, and then you go into your community or you go and meet someone, and a lot of times the people who need the most help are the people who just like don't have the language, don't have the understanding, or have the stigmas that make mental health and like scary, because a huge part of it is isolation. A huge part of it is feeling the loneliness, feel like you're alone. As Kelly mentioned before, even saying the word "I'm feeling suicidal," a lot of people are like, if I say that, someone's going to put me away somewhere.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times when I think about it, I'm just like, hey, yes, I have these big words, but also I recognize that those words aren't going to be the most helpful as the first steps. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of reminding them yourself of kind of like how most masters aren't teachers. It's usually the people who are like at the mid-level who are the ones who sell the most help books.
Yeah, that's good.
I think to that point, from my perspective, right, as somebody, I think a lot about the structural barriers and policy issues. And I think a lot of the problems that we have right now in making sure that we have a workforce that can adequately support people can't be fixed really fast. And that not only that means that communities are really important, and equipping communities with the tools, and yes, getting people access to services, but also there's a lot of things that community members can learn to support one another that don't have to be provided by a clinician. So I think thinking about, Jessica, to your point, right? It's really different when somebody who's been in a same situation as you says, I've been there and I hear you, right? It's just completely different from coming from somebody who gets it. So I think creating communities of peers is really important. And I think to that point, right, you have a place where you're getting support, but also you have a place where you belong, where there's other people you identify with who are going through something similar. And I think the biggest thing for me, as somebody who lives with, chronic suicidality, I have a place where I'm going to. So I'm in this community, and, even when I feel there's some days where I feel like I can't do it, or I don't want to do it, or all of those things, there's this vision of where I'm going with the people who I'm in community with. So I think activism as well can be really therapeutic for a lot of people as we're trying to make sure everybody has access to whatever they want and need.
Mm-hmm. And for me, I have to say connection. That's, one of the most important components of this whole area is, well, in particular with the adoption community, for so many families, once the adoption order is granted, it's like, it's over, it's done with, they have no more contact with the adoption agency, and they're just kind of left to get on with it. And that can be a really, really scary prospect for some families, because when we're thinking about adoption, what we're really talking about is children who have experienced significant trauma. Okay? All adopted children have experienced trauma to varying degrees. And so their adopted parents are then in this position of parenting a child who has been traumatized. And I mean, that's not something that you just innately know how to do. And so I think it's vital that we continue to reach out, let families know that, hey, we're here, we're thinking of you, if there's anything that you need, reach out. But it's also the message that families receive when they do. And that message has to be one of actually validating their experience, understanding where they're coming from, giving them that sense of compassion, and also offering a service that is trauma-informed. And so that's very much where I'm coming from in my private work and in the work that I do with the adoption agency, is really making sure that families feel as though there is a real safe space where they can go to access support, and that support is part of their lifelong journey of adoption.
Yeah. So you talked about like increasing awareness of language and how that provides access points, and creating situations where there's belonging and nurturing connection. And what would you say for the folks who are maybe wanting to know like an action step, something that I can do for my community in terms of informing people or creating that access? We all have individual ways of perhaps creating those spaces. What does it look like, perhaps, if you were to give advice?
From my perspective, how I got started, right, was I was in the process of, I wouldn't say that like I was at my best point when I started kind of doing this work, but I had felt a little bit secure in my recovery and well-being, taking care of myself first. And I just started sharing my story on social media. And I found out that I thought that I was the only person who felt like this my whole life. And it turns out that so many people around me felt the same way. So I think that just starting a conversation and sharing your story, right? You know, we can have stigma campaigns in education, but the biggest reducer of stigma is proximity. Do you know people around you who disclose things? So I think sharing your story, using the platforms that you have, it doesn't have to be social media. It could be, you know, your church, it could be your school, finding out safe ways to share your experience, I think frees a lot of other people. And at that point, when it's not just your story, you can put together pieces that really can help you build more resources that meet the needs of your community.
Yeah, that for me addresses the connective piece. I feel like that's so helpful to understand you don't have to be all better before you start to share your experiences and connect with others. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah. And within adoption, you know, we're really keen with all the parents that I work with and the agency that I work for, that, you know, it is about, you know, right from the beginning, you know, joining up in community with their adoptive parents who are in different phases of the adoption process. And, you know, of course, there are groups that, you know, may be more specific for different areas that people are in or countries they've adopted from, as an example. Just having that space and utilizing it kind of as and when, but knowing that it's there is so important. And for, you know, myself as a professional, you know, being able to make those links, you know, with the group leaders, and again, for them to know that, hey, I'm here as a support for you. Is there anything that you need? You know, is there a topic that the other parents you're in contact with are struggling with? If so, hey, maybe I can come in, talk for 15 minutes and help.
I also want to...
Go ahead, Parker.
Oh, I just wanted to answer Taylor Holliday's question. I think it kind of ties in on like what you can do. They are wondering if we have any advice about what to do after someone says they're struggling with suicidal thoughts. I think this question is something that, in my experience, is kind of like you tailor towards each person. For myself, I once said, this is not my year. It was last June. I was like, I'm not doing well. I won't be able to respond if people ask me how I'm doing. But if you send me memes about possums, that is the level of connection I can handle. I can handle sending a laugh react. And that is what helped me. And then it also held the door open for me when I needed to be, or had the ability to then talk. There's also the concept, especially if you're friends, of just being action oriented. That doesn't actually have to be around language, in the sense of maybe you know them and you just send them a burger. You're just like, hey, I got you some Grubhub, and just kind of know the support is there, because sometimes people don't have, because sometimes the pressure of talking might be too much. And so being present is there, validating your friends' feelings is there. And especially when it comes to understanding that sometimes it is strictly your brain does not produce the chemicals necessary. Sometimes it's social environment, and sometimes it's just out of the blue, nowhere to be seen, and kind of using your knowledge and just being like, okay, this is my friend, this is where I'm going, and allowing for them to tell you the avenues or taking some actions to give them the avenues.
Yeah.
I think two things not to do is tell them why they shouldn't feel that way and try to fix their problem. I think that suicide is so scary for most people, right? It's scary. And especially if you've never felt that way and you're feeling that way, it can be really scary for you too. But I think that the quickest way to get somebody to shut down is to tell them that, other people have it worse, or you shouldn't feel that way, or any of the things that people often hear when they're struggling with their mental health. Because a lot of times you feel like that yourself, right? You're like, oh, other people have it harder, or it doesn't make sense that I feel this way. I should just suck it up. And I think we can get that. We often pick those messages up from other people and from our culture. So I think shutting people, that's a great way to shut people down or to try to fix it for them. I think just being with somebody, sometimes people do want you to help problem solve, but I think just asking the question, like, do you just need me to listen, or do you just want me to sit here with you? Because I know from my experience with myself and from supporting a lot of other people is sometimes it's really, really hot and painful. And then if you sit through it with somebody else, that urge and that pain can kind of settle down, and you might be in a better place to make a decision about, okay, this is what I want to do from here. But I think just being with somebody non-judgmentally in whatever degree possible, right? Whether it's the possum memes, whether it's like talking through something that happened to them at work. I think whatever people need, just being there sounds simple. And I think it is. We just have to not try to fix other people.
Well, and I mean, really what we're talking about is being a compassionate presence alongside, your loved one, your friend, and really validating them. But I think part of this too is us really kind of taking that moment and being aware of what's coming up for us. I mean, obviously this is a highly emotive topic. There is a lot that's going to be raised for us when, we're thinking about, the idea of suicide. And certainly if someone, who we care about is telling us that they're thinking of hurting themselves, that's going to raise a lot. So I think part of it is, how we can, really think about what this raises within us, the emotions, the thoughts, sensations, etc., and how we manage ourselves in those moments, of discomfort.
Yeah. It makes me think of some of the experiences I had when I was in bad places, that I needed someone to validate my pain, just to recognize that I was hurting. And I didn't have language to truly articulate it. And the people that I often spoke to didn't have language to fully validate it. So it was messy. I had experiences later in life with medical professionals who became threatening presences because they didn't know how to handle it and they weren't sufficiently trained. So it felt like there were a lot of unsafe, insecure spaces for me to try to work some of this out. You hope that the medical community will understand. You hope that the psychological community, counselors and therapists will understand, but they don't always. And so you're always taking a risk to let someone know that you're hurting. It's a vulnerable risk. The hope is that someone's going to be able to hear you and recognize that your life is worth it, you're worth it, and to be patient with wherever you're at, whether that is the memes, whether that is a meal that's brought to you, whether it's just a presence in your life, whether it's silence and time to work it out. I really appreciate your answers. Suicide doesn't happen in a bubble. It doesn't happen separate from other oftentimes diagnosable mental illnesses, from interactions in one's home, in one's community, from poverty, from pandemic, right? These are all interconnected ideas. And I wonder if you all could speak to kind of accompanying life factors to consider when someone is struggling.
For me, it's really around the impact of trauma, in the families that I work with. And with adopted children, that impact can be really pervasive. It impacts the way that their brain develops, the way that their little systems are formed, how they're able to relate to one another, how they're able to learn. I mean, it's everywhere. And so it's, really having that understanding, that trauma-informed understanding around what's happening. for these children within their families, and how we might approach a little one who has gone through these experiences. And so that's, clearly what I do a lot in my work is supporting parents around an approach called trust-based relational intervention. So at the core of that, though, is helping children and families to feel as though they're not alone.
Mm-hmm. That's great. So you're providing for those families kind of just a greater context about what might be happening in the life of the adoptee.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So, that impact of trauma, how it's affected them in the past, what you're seeing in the present, there's that connection, and really being able to tease that out and have a greater level of understanding, which then, of course, informs how you respond, how you approach your child. Understanding that they're not being naughty. they literally are not able to control themselves in these moments, and intentionally disruptive behavior. So, that is so important, to actually view children in the context of their early experiences.
Mm-hmm. Great. Can you all speak? Go ahead.
Oh, yes. One of the things that I work a lot on, Taylor, I'm glad you're Googling possum memes. They are all amazing. Is understanding that there are different points in which suicidal ideation can stem from. And so for me, it's being like, well, I am Black in America. So last June, I was like, this makes a lot of sense that I'm feeling worse than usual. I am queer. So there is those things that can intersect and pile on. And when it comes to class, it comes to, where you are, life struggles. And then there's also just mental health in general. And also the other thing that I take a lot is recognizing that sometimes it doesn't have to come from anywhere. I think because a lot of times I have encountered people in which they're like, well, nothing's wrong, so I shouldn't feel bad. And then you're like, nothing actually has to be wrong. Your mental health, sometimes it just is. And understanding that just like how some days you wake up and you're like, I'm having a great day. It's just as natural to have those moments of having a bad day. And so understanding that there are different factors in all ways, and just like how no two people are like, no 2 days or no 2 people with suicidal ideation are alike.
That's great. Thank you.
I think you both get at kind of the two topics that came up for me, which were isolation and despair. So I'm the only person who feels like this. I'm disconnected from the community around me, and it will never get better. And that's part of why I'm going to bang on the peer support drum, but that's part of why I think that lived experience and people sharing their stories is so important, because maybe we're not in a space where we want to share with somebody else yet. And seeing that somebody else was there and then they got through it, and that things got better, and that there are concrete things that you can do to support yourself and to improve your well-being and to work through it too. So it's I think that addressing isolation, whether that's just people sharing their stories on social media, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be with your friends. It can just be being exposed to those ideas with real people. But also giving people hope that you can be there and that things can get better for you. Things don't have to be perfect, right? And that's where I think the activism piece comes into, because I think for a lot of times, it feels disingenuous when people tell you that things will get better. It can feel like the things that are happening around you are so big and so difficult to unwrap or change. But the thing that I think about, right, or the way that I think about it is it can get better because we can make it better. And there are things that we can do to support ourselves, and there are things that we can do with other people. And I think one of the biggest drivers is to say, okay, all the people I know who are doing really powerful work is I felt this and I never want anyone to feel like this. I think whether it's your survivor yourself of a suicide attempt or a survivor of loss of somebody else. So I think it's just so powerful for many of the people who are listening, for everybody here, for all of the people doing the work, is that just sharing your story is helping other people feel less alone and less despair.
Yeah. It reminds me a little bit, I read that, you know, most of our most painful experiences and traumas come through the context of relationship, and it's through the context of relationship that those are healed as well. There's something that we uncover about ourselves through our own work that allows us to access better ways to do relationship. But there's so many unhelpful ways to do that. And Kelly, you reminded me of like that idea when someone's hurting or someone's dysregulated and you tell them, calm down. And it's like, they're not going to calm down. Like, that's the most ridiculous advice to offer. And so connecting a lot of what you all were saying, there's this idea that I'm having my own isolated inner experience. I'm alone inside and I'm different than everybody else. And that's the belief that I carry. And that's terrifyingly despairing. And so I become super dysregulated, and I may not have the tools to understand how to bring myself back into equilibrium. So I'm kind of living in my peaks or like drowning in my troughs, and I don't know how to get out. But it's through the context of relationship and being trauma informed and being able to regulate it enough to take on new information, especially be seen in the pain, that allows us to begin to make those roads out. Am I kind of getting that?
Yeah.
Red?
What you're making me think about is there's the relationship that we have with other people, but there's also the relationship that we have with ourselves. Many people who are super supportive of other people who are talking about their distress are brutal to themselves when they experience distress. And I studied positive psychology, and one of the things that's been most impactful for me, especially in my recovery, is the idea of self-compassion. There's this kind of phrase that says, what I'm experiencing right now is suffering. Suffering is a part of life. And, you know, I can be okay right now, right? The idea with self-compassion is that you can acknowledge that you're in pain, and it's okay that you're in pain, and being in pain is a human experience. So even if you're not, I think it's I'm okay, and I'm not the only one who feels bad, and I can be kind to myself in the same way that I would be kind to other people. I think, yes, the peer support stuff and the connecting with others and healing with a therapist, but I think if we are so brutal on ourselves, sometimes we can give it away and we can't hold it. So I think the ability to like cultivate that is really important.
Yeah, I also want to kind of take a tangent on that point, because we are talking about activism and help. I understand, Kat. We are talking about, this is my cat Fonzie. We are talking about activism and helping others, but I also want to speak on how helping yourself, or for those who are watching, for themselves, that is also important. And I think of this quote a lot, and it was just like, you're on this, like, you can be here to help one person, that person can be yourself. And that it's okay to just like be like, this is my centering point, and to also, on the same side of the same coin, or a different side of the same coin, is to also take away connotations for, I understand, Kat, for a lot of different words like mediocre and average, because you're like, I'm not having a great day, but like being okay with like, mediocre is good, average is good. Adam Sandler makes millions upon millions of dollars. They're not critically acclaimed, but he's doing amazing. And to kind of take all these to, like, when you think these words of yourself or think of your situation, because sometimes you don't have the capacity for everything to be like, it doesn't matter that I'm not on this rocket ship to the moon. I'm still here. This is fine. Mediocre is good. Average is good. And I'm aiming for an average day. So just to remember, like, your activism is also for yourself, and just to, even in your worst times, just, it's okay for yourself.
Well,
sorry to bring up Amazon.
No, you're great.
Well, thinking about the children that I work with, you know, they are incredibly brutal on themselves, and they often blame themselves for what happened to them, for the trauma that they experienced, the neglect, the abuse. And I think that one of the really interesting points, though, is that one of the biggest protective factors in reducing the likelihood of young people attempting suicide, whether they be adopted or not, is actually the family environment. and how important that family environment is for the healing process. And going to your point, Stephan, that, you know, healing happens in relationship. For adopted children, especially, their healing happens in relationship with their parents. That is one that creates a feeling within them of feeling safe, of them feeling connected and loved by their parents and wider family, and certainly within themselves, and the relationship that ultimately helps them to be able to regulate themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, bringing up that point, you know, not all of us grew up in contexts that were secure. Not all of us had families that either understood mental health on their own, or how to offer healthy mental health solutions to their progeny. And so I'm a product of a family that loved me very much, but had very destructive ways of being. And so having to do a lot of work for that myself, I'm of Latin origin, from Puerto Rico, grew up in the States, kind of third culture. I'm neither American enough nor Puerto Rican enough. I'm queer. I'm in predominantly white environments. And in my culture, there was no such thing as counseling. That didn't happen. There was psychiatrists, and that was it. And you only went if you were, you know, crazy. And so when I started to have mental emotional health issues, there was in my family no knowledge about what to do. And then they were asking sort of their white counterparts about what they should do to help this kid who's in distress. And it looks like a lot what you were saying, Jessica, acting up. And there was just a complete lack of knowledge about what to do. And so I wonder, if, in your opinions, what is it like to kind of hold different identities, and what do you offer to your communities who are struggling to enter into conversations around access barriers, mental health, emotional health, connection, relationship, any of those?
Well, thinking about the topic of identity for adoptees in general, that's often very loaded. And that whole concept of identity, you know, who am I? Where do I come from? Where do I fit in? The whole concept of family. I mean, these are struggles, very real struggles, that, you know, adoptees are confronted with at different ages and different developmental stages. It's really a lifelong process of finding that sense of self and where I belong. And so I think that's a really important part of the work, you know, not just as a professional, but I think that actually the most work happens within the family environment. And so I just see myself really as a facilitator for parents to, you know, be the most supportive presence that they can be for their children, to really help them along that journey of healing, and that journey of ultimately, you know, feeling comfortable with who they are, because of who they are and where they came from, and their full history, their full life story.
Great.
I also want to say, oh, sorry, Kelly, you can this. I also want to say, when it comes to the concepts of identity, and as an artist, I do want to also advocate for sometimes just creating art or indulging in hobbies. And, you know, when you're depressed and when you're sad, like, it's often very hard to get into things. And it ties back into when I say take the context of good and bad, especially because when you often talk to people, it is messy. I recognize that we are professionals, we have this language, but, you know, in the moment with your friends, it can be messy. And especially surrounding yourself with art that you find is beautiful and participating in art that you like, or bringing your friends into these moments of beauty and surrounding themselves, especially as Stephan, like, I have like some with struggles, you know, child of an immigrant, first generation American, like I reconcile my African identity with my American identity, you know, being fat and all this stuff. So I've made an untold amount of fat African art. Have I shared a lot of it? No, because it's for me. And then surrounding myself with that, or finding people who make that, or, you know, inviting friends over for paint parties where they're like, I can't draw. I was like, I don't care if you can draw. I bought dollar store paint. It's not going to be a Picasso, you know, like, and just like taking those moments to just kind of revel in creating your space and holding your space, and indulging in parts of your identity that might be hard to access otherwise.
That's great.
I would say, I guess from a disability perspective, unpacking cultural norms and beliefs and values and seeing how those can help you engage and keep you from engaging. Even the point earlier, why is it not okay to have an average day? Right? Like, what is this compulsion with optimization and everything has to be perfect and everybody has to be the best and all of those things, just so much pressure, right? And I think that part of it is part of promoting and supporting your own mental health is seeing the ways in which the world promotes toxic mental health, and being in community with other people, or at least being in spaces where maybe there's another way than just the kind of toxic dominant norms and messages that we get. And I think that those can be, there's like from the disability perspective, right? I think that there's things that we can do to include people and exclude people. So I do a lot. I just wrote a paper on disability accommodations in higher education, right? And if you have depression, you might write a great paper and then you might get an F because you gave it in 3 days late. And it's not a function of your ability to write a good paper. It's a function of the rules and norms. And I think going through the process of saying, okay, what is me and what do I care about and what is impacting me in the world around me that might be changed or that I can relate to differently, I think makes a big difference.
Yeah. I hear a little bit of Parker's activism in that you are presenting a challenge to the idea of conformity and the assimilation and what is considered and by whom a cultural norm. So the rule that we must describe sort of acts as a pressurizer for a lot of the feelings to come out. And you said it earlier, Kelly, pain is part of the human experience. This is normal. It's normal for us to feel this way and then to respond to it, but we're often pushed to ignore, sublimate, deny, pretend, and and that's how we reach these kind of crisis points where we're now able to challenge these ideas a little bit more readily. Is that kind of fair?
Yeah, I also want to say on Kelly's point and on what's normal. A lot of I think especially because TikTok is probably one of the bigger platforms where this is happening right now. Anyone who was in the Tumblr 2010 to 2014 era also knows that there are so many communities in which you are perfectly normal, and you have to sometimes think, is this abnormal or is this just uncommon? And when you also think about the disability perspective, is to kind of welcome that language, especially because, I'm chronically ill. And then I'm just well, I'm chronically ill, so I sit down a lot. People are like, why aren't you taking the stairs? Why are you taking the elevator? It's I can't. That's normal for me. It might be uncommon in your daily life, but it's normal. And to kind of, and to tie it back into suicide prevention, is to kind of, whenever you feel the pressure, and just be okay, what is this specific culture that we've done as a disservice to me? Because is this isolation? Is this desperation? Is this feelings of inadequacy I feel because of me, or is it because of these external factors? And remembering that these factors that you feel, it might not be as uncommon. If you can go on and find places like ADHD TikTok, the amount of people who comment was wow, I guess I have to talk to my doctor soon because I make a meme of something, is very important to kind of take into account. And to also, and when you find people and expanding your community so you can gain these languages and take different parts of different people, in the same way of another analogy of when you see those infomercials at 3 a.m. and you're who needs that? And you remember most of them are actually designed for people with disabilities. And you're oh, why don't we just structure it for that normalcy? Maybe I should start stimming. Maybe I should do all these things and try not to hold myself to this very intense culture we've created. and allow yourself these spaces to be like, this is how I exist, and to give yourself that release of pressure, so therefore other parts of yourself can feel that release of pressure.
Yeah.
If that was concise enough.
Yeah. I hear that there's like this normalization process that offers the validation and the destigmatization, and it just takes the pressure off. I can just be.
Yeah, it's okay to just be bad, to be unfeeling well, and just, that's a lot of stuff. It's just normal.
Yeah.
I think that points to something that I know a lot of folks who I know who've had thoughts of suicide feel shame, right? So it's like normalizing that having thoughts doesn't make you bad. It doesn't mean you have to do it. It doesn't mean you have to do them. It doesn't make you this like separate person, but just that it's a thing. And it can be a guide towards something, but it doesn't have to be devastating, and it doesn't mean that it'll never go away. And I think that that's really important too, is to just say, oh, a lot of people, not your pain is completely valid and it's important, and we want to sit through it, but you're not the only person who's ever felt this way, and you're not alone in those feelings. And maybe it's incredibly painful, but it is part of the breadth of the human experience is having thoughts like these. It doesn't mean don't get help. It doesn't mean it's not serious, but it also means you're not bad or broken because these things are in your mind for a moment or for a long period of time.
It's a good distinction. Jessica, did you want to add anything?
Well, I think that message is just so important. That it's your thoughts, they're fleeting. They're not who you are.
Yeah.
And that's a message that, with the children I work with is so important, to really have come across and to have them just kind of sit with and hold and explore.
Yeah.
And I think that, just kind of that this too shall pass is so important.
I find myself saying no feeling is final pretty often. And so we don't have to be shocked by any feeling that one is having, by any revelation or connection to some of the darker parts of us. It's just like, they're there. You connected to it. All right. And then teaching people to sit in the discomfort of any expectation they have about how they should be, right? This is how it is right now. Maybe it won't be forever. Who knows? So I'm curious here, kind of in the last couple of minutes, could you all share any thoughts or feelings that you have about something that would offer hope to people who are in situations where perhaps they're struggling with suicidal thoughts or ideation?
I will say, as we said, you're valid, you're not alone. When you're ready, when you're able, there's help for you. And also, as someone who's had suicidal ideation since I was 8 years old, yes, I still struggle, but I named my guy, his name is Bartholomew, Bart for short, and I kind of just yell at Bart. Sometimes I don't treat it that deep. I just am like, damn, Bart, why are you up in my business today? And that's how I hold space. That's how I make it. You can cope in all ways, as silly or as serious as you want, as long as it works for you.
I think that's fantastic, Parker. I love that kind of, that externalization and creating a character. And with the kids that I work with, that too, that's something that they find to be really helpful. But I think that, overall, the message, it's one of hope that, there are, for the families that I work with, there are services out there that, can help in a very real, practical way to create healing. And that's really what this is about, is creating those healing spaces for children so that they can move through and move forward in their lives. And for them to know that their parents are going to be alongside them through that process, that they are not alone and there's nothing wrong with them.
I just thought of, there's this story that I tell about, having thoughts like these and feelings like these and being little, and one night having this like randomly specific memory of being alone in the middle of the night and looking at the moon and being like, I don't know anybody who feels like this, but I bet there's other people looking at the moon who feel like this, and I'm going to find them. And I think that like maybe it doesn't feel like it'll get better. Maybe you're having a hard time reaching out to somebody, but your moon people are out there. Like that's who I've been trying to find. And once I found other people like me, I found that even when it gets hard and even when I feel alone now, I've moved forward and pulled forward by my ability to like try to find other and bring together other people who are like looking at the moon in the middle of the night. So I think your people are out there. And you know, I hate to say just it gets better, but it can get better. And there's people who want to help you make it better too.
Yeah. I would echo that. I don't know that the symptoms of my depression or suicidality, the feelings have often not changed. My ability to respond to my feelings has increasingly changed. And so how much I believe that part of myself that is in despair or is in deep pain over which he is powerless, he can't do anything. He's just there to remind me how tiring it is to be trying all the time, how much effort it takes in a culture that has very little compassion or sensitivity. And we live kind of in a capitalist state that is always pushing us to efficiency and production and conformity and assimilation. That's exhausting. So I'm often telling that part of myself, yeah, you are tired. Let's take a break. Let's pause for a minute. My ability to handle him with a lot more care is what has grown and changed, even though the feelings are very intense and remain intense. If that makes any sense. Any closing thoughts from y'all? I mean, this has been really lovely to hear your perspectives. Katie, is there a place where we can connect folks to our panelists? Oh, I can't hear you, Kate. I'm sorry.
Unmuting myself. Story of our lives over the last year or so. Yes, I'll drop some information in the comments, but Kelly with Mental Health America, Jessica and Parker, if you all want to share any website information or where we can find y'all on social media, go ahead and do that.
Yeah. Oh, Jessica, you first.
Okay. Well, you can find me at nurturedbelongingcom, and I would really encourage any adoptive parents or anyone connected to the adoption community in this space, to have a look at my website specifically around trust-based relational intervention, or to just have a little Google of it, because I think that when we are thinking about how to help adopted children move forward and heal, it's such a fantastic approach to learn about and to try, and hopefully, whatever modality you happen to choose, just know that there is hope and there is healing for your family.
Thank you.
So you can find me at highhopesilverworks.com. That's my website. You can follow me on TikTok at highhopesilvervibes, is where I post most of my meme content, and High Hope Silverworks is my handle everywhere else. So that's usually where you can find me.
Cool. Katie, is there anything else that we need to address?
No, other than to say thank you to all of you for that amazing conversation. I like that I just get to sit off screen and nod my head for the entire conversation. I appreciate all of what y'all had to say. Parker, I am going to hold on to that. Your activism is yourself for a while. It's felt like I needed that one today. So thank you for sharing that as well. And then for all of the folks out there, this is the first conversation that will be part of this campaign. We will be having 2 more later on in September. So you can continue to follow us on social media. Check out our website at TWLOHA.com/WSPD. As far as all of the information for the campaign, we'll be sharing that information there as well. But yeah, hopefully you can join us for those conversations. And then National Suicide Prevention Week here in the United States is the week of September 5th through the 11th. And then World Suicide Prevention Day is on September 10th. So we'll have action steps throughout the week and then some different things happening on the day of World Suicide Prevention Day as well. So stay tuned for all of those things. But
y'all are wonderful. Thank you for sharing so openly.
Thank you.
Ditto. So, all right, I'm gonna hit the button and end the broadcast, but thank you all for joining us, and thank you all out there for joining us as well. We appreciate your presence and are grateful to have another day with you.